It was the kind of night when staying alive felt harder than giving up, and somehow, that was exactly why Emma Thompson refused to stop walking. The rain didn't fall, it attacked, sharp drops slamming against the pavement like gravel, soaking through her thin jacket in seconds, clinging to her skin until even the wind felt heavier, her sneakers squished with every step, water pooling inside as she shifted her baby closer to her chest, whispering softly, "It's okay. I've got you," though her voice trembled more than the storm itself. The streetlights flickered in uneven intervals, casting brief flashes of yellow across empty sidewalks, revealing what no one else seemed to notice, a young mother standing alone under a broken bus stop shelter, her hair plastered to her face, her arms wrapped tightly around a 6-month-old wrapped in a faded blanket that was no longer dry. 30 minutes ago, her car had died 2 miles back, engine coughing once before surrendering completely, and her phone had followed soon after, the screen going black just as she tried to call for help. Now, there was nothing left but the road, the storm, and the quiet realization that no one was coming. Cars passed occasionally, headlights slicing through the rain, but they never slowed, never hesitated, just moved on as if she were part of the scenery, something inconvenient to notice. One driver even swerved slightly to avoid a puddle, splashing water toward her feet without a second glance, and Emma didn't react, because she couldn't afford to waste energy on disappointment anymore. Her baby stirred, a soft, restless sound breaking through the roar of the wind, and Emma instinctively tightened her hold, rocking gently despite the cold biting into her fingers. "Just a little longer," she murmured, though she had no idea how much longer she could keep that promise. The temperature had dropped into the low 40s, and each gust of wind cut through her like a warning she refused to hear, because stopping meant thinking, and thinking meant fear, and fear meant she might break. Somewhere in the distance, thunder rolled again, deeper this time, closer, as if the sky itself was collapsing inch by inch, and for a brief second, Emma closed her eyes, not in defeat, but in stubborn defiance, as if daring the night to take one more thing from her. Then came the sound that didn't belong, a low, smooth engine, steady and controlled, approaching slower than the others, deliberate in a way that made her look up despite herself. Through the rain, a pair of headlights cut through the darkness, not rushing past, not avoiding her, but aligning directly with where she stood, and for the first time that night, something unfamiliar slipped into her chest, something she didn't trust enough to name yet. The car eased closer, tires hissing against the wet asphalt, until it stopped just a few feet away, idling quietly like it had made a decision long before reaching her. Emma didn't move, her body stiff with instinct, her mind already listing reasons to stay back, to protect what little she had left, because help had never come without a cost before. The driver's side window lowered slowly, revealing a man in a dark coat, his features calm, unreadable, untouched by the chaos outside, and when he spoke, his voice was steady, low, carrying none of the urgency of the storm. "You're going to freeze out here," he said, not as a question, not as a guess, but as a simple truth, and somehow, that made it harder to ignore. Emma did not answer right away because answers had always come with consequences, and she had learned that silence was sometimes the only protection she had left. The rain kept falling, soaking her sleeves, dripping from her hair, while her baby shifted again against her chest, letting out a soft cry that cut through every doubt she tried to hold on to, and that sound alone made the decision heavier than fear. The man did not rush her, did not step out, did not push, he simply waited with one hand resting on the steering wheel, the other reaching across to unlock the passenger door with a quiet click that somehow sounded louder than the thunder. "It is warmer inside," he added, his tone unchanged, steady, like someone who was used to being listened to without raising his voice. Emma swallowed, her eyes scanning the empty street behind the car, then the dark windows, then his face again, searching for something she could trust, something real, but all she found was calm, and that unsettled her more than anything else because calm was not something she recognized in strangers. Another gust of wind tore through the street, stronger this time, slipping through the thin blanket around her baby, and the small cry that followed was sharper, desperate, and Emma felt it in her chest like a warning she could not ignore. Her arms tightened instinctively, shielding the tiny face pressed against her, and for a second, she closed her eyes, not to think, but to choose. When she opened them again, she stepped forward. The movement was small, cautious, as if the ground might shift beneath her, and she kept her distance until she reached the open door, the warm air inside brushing against her face like something she had almost forgotten existed. She hesitated one last time, her voice barely above the rain. "Why are you helping me?" The man met her gaze without hesitation, without curiosity, without expectation. "Because you need help," he said simply, and there was no performance in it, no hidden weight, just a statement that stood on its own. That answer did not erase her fear, but it gave her something else to hold on to, something quieter, something steadier, and that was enough. Emma climbed into the passenger seat, careful, protective, keeping her baby close as she pulled the door shut behind her, and the sound of the storm immediately softened, reduced to a distant rhythm against the glass. The warmth inside the car wrapped around her like a shield, and for the first time that night, her body reacted before her mind could catch up, her shoulders lowering slightly, her breath slowing, her grip loosening just enough for the baby to settle. The man reached toward the dashboard and adjusted the heat without looking at her, then handed over a clean, folded cloth from the center console. "For the baby," he said, and Emma took it with a quiet nod, gently patting the damp edges of the blanket, her hands still trembling but more from exhaustion now than cold. For a few moments, neither of them spoke, the silence filled only by the steady hum of the engine and the softened echo of rain outside, and then the car began to move, pulling away from the broken shelter, leaving behind the place where she had almost given up. Emma stared ahead, her reflection faint in the glass, barely recognizing the woman looking back at her, and she realized something that felt both fragile and overwhelming at once, that for reasons she could not explain, a stranger had stopped when no one else did, and somehow, that single decision had already changed more than just the night. The windshield wipers moved in a steady rhythm, back and forth, cutting through sheets of rain that refused to slow, while inside the car everything felt strangely still, as if the storm had been left behind even though it continued just inches away. Emma Thompson kept her eyes forward, her fingers gently adjusting the edge of the cloth around her baby, who had finally settled into a quiet, uneven sleep, the kind that came after too much discomfort and not enough rest. The warmth in the car had reached her bones now, but it brought a different kind of awareness, one that made her realize just how cold she had been before, how close she had been to losing control without even noticing it. She shifted slightly in her seat, careful not to disturb the small, fragile piece she had managed to hold on to, and for a moment, she allowed herself to breathe without counting seconds or calculating next steps. Beside her, Daniel Whitmore drove with quiet precision, his hands steady on the wheel, his gaze focused on the road ahead, not asking questions, not filling the silence, as if he understood that some story should not be pulled out too quickly. The city lights began to appear in the distance, blurred by rain and motion, glowing in soft streaks of white and gold, and Emma watched them like someone returning to a world she was not sure she still belonged to. "There is a hospital about 10 minutes from here," Daniel said after a while, his voice calm, measured, "or I can take you somewhere else if you prefer." Emma hesitated, not because she did not hear him, but because choices had not felt this open in a long time. She glanced down at her baby, brushing a damp strand of hair away from the tiny forehead, and answered quietly, "She is just cold. I think she will be okay." Daniel gave a small nod, acknowledging without pressing, and adjusted the route with a subtle turn of the wheel. The heater continued to hum softly, and with each passing mile, the tension in Emma's shoulders eased in small, almost unnoticeable ways, like knots slowly loosening after being pulled too tight for too long. A sudden sound broke the calm, sharp but brief, as Daniel's phone connected to the car system, and a voice came through, professional and urgent, "Mr. Whitmore, the board is waiting for you. The meeting was scheduled 30 minutes ago." Emma froze, her breath catching slightly as the name settled in her mind, unfamiliar yet heavy with meaning, and she turned her head just enough to look at him, really look this time, noticing the fine details she had missed before, the tailored coat, the quiet confidence, the kind of presence that did not need to announce itself. Daniel did not react with frustration or urgency, he simply pressed a button on the steering wheel. "Reschedule," he said, his tone even, leaving no space for argument, and the line went silent. The car continued forward without slowing, without changing direction, as if nothing had interrupted it at all, but everything had already shifted. Emma looked down again, her thoughts moving faster now, connecting pieces she had not realized were there, and a quiet realization formed, not loud, not overwhelming, but undeniable, that the man who had stopped for her in the storm was someone who could have been anywhere else, doing anything else, and yet he had chosen this road, this moment, this decision. She swallowed, her voice softer than before. "You did not have to stop," she said, not as a question, but as something closer to understanding. Daniel kept his eyes on the road, the rain beginning to ease slightly as they moved deeper into the city. "I know," he replied, and there was something in that answer that lingered longer than the words themselves, something that did not explain, did not justify, but quietly confirmed that sometimes the most important choices were the ones no one required you to make. The rain softened as the car moved deeper into the city, no longer a violent force but a steady whisper against the windows, and with it, something inside Emma Thompson began to quiet as well, though not completely, because peace felt unfamiliar and she did not trust it to stay. The baby stirred lightly in her arms, a small movement followed by a faint sound, and Emma instinctively adjusted her hold, brushing her fingers gently across the child's cheek, checking for warmth, for breath, for reassurance that everything was still okay. The streetlights grew brighter, closer together now, reflecting off wet pavement in long streaks of gold, and the world outside began to look less like a place to survive and more like somewhere people actually lived, but Emma remained still, caught somewhere between those two realities. Daniel Whitmore slowed the car as they approached an intersection, the red light casting a soft glow across the interior, illuminating the quiet exhaustion on her face, the way her shoulders curved inward as if protecting something more than just the child in her arms. He noticed it without staring, the way he noticed everything, not with curiosity, but with a kind of awareness that did not need acknowledgement. "There is a 24-hour pharmacy 2 blocks ahead," he said, his voice low enough not to disturb the fragile calm inside the car. "We can stop and get something warm for her, maybe a dry blanket." Emma looked up, surprised not by the offer itself, but by the detail, the fact that he had thought one step ahead without being asked, and for a moment, she did not know how to respond because she was not used to someone anticipating her needs before she voiced them. "You do not have to," she said quietly, almost automatically, the words coming from habit rather than intention, but Daniel did not argue, did not insist. He simply turned the wheel slightly as the light changed, guiding the car toward the side street without another word, as if the decision had already been made long before she spoke. The car pulled into a small, well-lit parking lot, the bright white lights overhead cutting cleanly through the damp night, and for a second, Emma hesitated again, not because she was afraid now, but because stepping out meant facing reality again, even if only for a moment. Daniel shifted the car into park and reached into the back seat, retrieving a dark umbrella, opening it smoothly before stepping out into the light rain. He moved around to her side and opened the door, holding the umbrella steady above them without rushing her, without looking at her in a way that made her feel watched, only present. Emma stepped out carefully, holding her baby close, the warmth from the car still clinging faintly to her skin, and for the first time that night, she was not alone in the open air. They walked side by side toward the entrance, his pace matching hers without needing to adjust, as if he understood that she could not move any faster, not tonight. Inside, the pharmacy was quiet, the hum of fluorescent lights replacing the sound of rain, and Emma paused just inside the door, momentarily overwhelmed by the normalcy of it all, the stocked shelves, the soft music playing somewhere overhead, the ordinary world continuing as if nothing had happened. Daniel reached for a basket and placed it gently in her free hand, not as a command, but as an invitation. "Take what you need," he said simply, and Emma stood there for a second longer, staring at the basket like it was something unfamiliar, something she was not sure she was allowed to accept, until slowly, carefully, she began to move. Emma Thompson moved slowly through the aisle, her fingers brushing against items she recognized but had not allowed herself to consider in weeks, maybe longer, because each choice carried a cost she had learned to measure before reaching for anything. The basket in her hand felt unfamiliar, not because of its weight, but because of what it represented, the permission to choose without calculating what she would have to give up later. She paused near the baby section, her eyes scanning shelves lined with neatly arranged blankets, small bottles, soft clothing in gentle colors that felt almost out of place after everything she had just come through, and for a moment, she hesitated again, her instinct telling her to take the cheapest option, the smallest necessity, just enough to get through another night. Behind her, Daniel Whitmore stood at a respectful distance, not watching closely, not directing, giving her space in a way that felt intentional, as if he understood that this moment mattered more than the items themselves. Emma reached out and picked up a soft, thicker blanket, running her fingers across the fabric, testing its warmth, imagining how it would feel wrapped around her baby, and something in her expression shifted slightly, a quiet softness replacing the guarded tension that had followed her all night. She placed it carefully into the basket, then added a small pack of baby wipes, a clean onesie, each movement deliberate, measured, but no longer rushed. The baby stirred again, letting out a faint sound, and Emma instinctively adjusted her hold, whispering something too soft to hear, but the tone carried everything: reassurance, exhaustion, love that had not broken despite everything around it. She moved to the next aisle, hesitating briefly before selecting a bottle of formula, checking the label twice out of habit, even though she already knew what she needed, and placed it into the basket with the same careful precision. Time seemed to slow inside the store, the outside world fading further away with each quiet step she took, until she reached the checkout counter and stopped, the reality of the moment catching up to her again. She looked down at the basket, then at Daniel, her voice low, almost uncertain. "I cannot pay you back," she said, not as an apology, but as a fact she needed him to understand. Daniel stepped forward then, not closing the distance abruptly, just enough to be part of the moment, and placed his hand lightly on the counter, his expression unchanged, calm, grounded. "This is not a loan," he replied, his tone steady, leaving no space for negotiation or obligation, and for a second, Emma did not respond because she was not used to hearing something given without conditions attached. The cashier scanned the items quietly, the soft beeping sound filling the small space between them, and when the total appeared, Daniel reached into his coat and handed over a card without looking at the screen, without checking the amount, as if the number itself did not matter. The transaction completed in seconds, simple, effortless, and yet to Emma, it felt like something far larger than what it appeared to be. She gathered the items slowly, holding the bag in one hand and her baby in the other, and as they stepped back toward the door, the rain outside had softened even more, reduced now to a gentle drizzle that tapped lightly against the glass. For the first time that night, Emma did not feel like she was fighting against something, and as she followed Daniel back toward the car, she realized that what he had given her was not just warmth, not just dry clothes or supplies, but something she had almost forgotten existed, the feeling that for one moment, she did not have to carry everything alone. The door closed behind them with a soft click, sealing out the last trace of rain, and as Emma Thompson stepped back into the car, the contrast felt even stronger. This time, not just warmth against cold, but something steadier against everything uncertain she had been carrying. She placed the small bag carefully at her feet before settling into the seat, adjusting the new blanket around her baby with slow, deliberate movements, making sure every edge was tucked just right, as if this small act could protect more than just warmth. The baby responded almost immediately, her tiny body relaxing, her breathing evening out into a quiet rhythm that filled the silence in a way words could not, and Emma watched for a second longer than necessary, as if confirming that this moment was real, that it would hold. Daniel Whitmore returned to the driver's seat without drawing attention, closing the door gently and starting the engine with the same calm precision he had shown all night, and as the car pulled back onto the road, the city lights reflected across the windshield in softer patterns now, no longer distorted by heavy rain, just steady lines guiding them forward. Emma rested her head back slightly, not fully relaxing, but no longer bracing against something either, her eyes drifting briefly to the passing streets, the lit windows of buildings, the quiet signs of lives continuing in ways she had felt disconnected from for so long. She tightened her hold around the baby again, not out of fear this time, but out of instinct, grounding herself in something real. "Where do you need to go?" Daniel asked after a few minutes, his voice even, not intrusive, simply opening space for her to answer when she was ready. Emma hesitated, her gaze lowering to her hands, then to the sleeping child, and for a moment, the answer felt heavier than anything else that night because it carried a truth she did not often say out loud. "I was heading to a shelter," she said quietly, the words coming slower than she expected, "about 15 minutes from where my car stopped." The admission settled between them, not dramatic, not emphasized, just present, and Daniel did not react with surprise or sympathy. he only nodded once, as if it were simply information he needed to know, nothing more, nothing less. "We will get you there," he replied, adjusting the route with a smooth turn, his focus remaining on the road ahead, and something in the way he said it made it feel certain, not hopeful. Not conditional, just decided. Emma looked out the window again, her reflection faint against the glass, and for the first time that night, she allowed her thoughts to move beyond the next minute, beyond immediate survival, even if only slightly. The weight she had been carrying had not disappeared, but it had shifted, redistributed in a way that made it feel possible to breathe through it. The car moved steadily through the quiet streets, the storm now reduced to distant echoes behind them, and inside, there was no urgency, no pressure, just a quiet continuation of something neither of them needed to define. Emma's voice came again after a while, softer than before, almost careful. "You keep saying we," she said, not questioning, but noticing, and Daniel glanced at her briefly before returning his eyes to the road. "Because you are not alone right now," he answered simply, and there was no emphasis in his tone, no attempt to make the moment larger than it was, just a truth stated without hesitation. Emma did not respond, but her grip on the blanket loosened slightly, her shoulders easing in a way that did not draw attention to itself, and as the car continued forward, she realized something she had not expected to feel again so soon, not safety, not yet, but something close enough to it that she did not push it away. The streets grew quieter as they moved farther from the center of the city, the bright storefronts giving way to longer stretches of dimly lit roads and scattered buildings, and Emma Thompson felt the shift not just outside the window, but somewhere deeper, where the noise of constant survival had finally begun to fade into something more manageable. She adjusted the blanket again, though it no longer needed fixing, her fingers moving out of habit rather than necessity, and her gaze lingered on her baby's peaceful face, tracing the small details she had memorized during sleepless nights, the curve of her cheek, the softness of her breath, the quiet proof that she had made it through another day. The car slowed as they approached a quieter neighborhood, the kind of place that did not draw attention, where buildings blended into one another and the only movement came from the occasional passing car or a flicker of light behind a window. Daniel Whitmore guided the car with the same steady focus, his presence unchanged, unaffected by the transition from busy streets to silence, as if his role in this moment remained exactly the same no matter where they were. "It should be close," Emma said softly, her voice almost blending into the hum of the engine, and Daniel nodded once, scanning the street signs with quiet efficiency until a modest building came into view, its exterior plain but lit by a single overhead light near the entrance, casting a faint glow onto the wet pavement below. The word shelter was not written anywhere, but it did not need to be. The line of worn steps, the faint movement behind the curtains, the stillness that felt heavy rather than calm, it all spoke clearly enough. Daniel eased the car to a stop near the curb, the engine idling quietly as the last remnants of rain tapped lightly against the windshield, and for a moment, neither of them moved. Emma looked at the building, then down at her baby, then at her hands, as if preparing herself to step back into a world that required more from her than she had left to give. She reached for the door handle but paused, her fingers resting there without pulling, and the silence stretched just long enough to carry something unspoken, something neither of them had addressed yet. "Thank you," she said finally, the word simple, but carrying more weight than anything she had said before, and Daniel turned slightly toward her, not interrupting, not dismissing, just acknowledging the moment as it was. Emma opened the door carefully, stepping out into the cool night air, now calm and still, the storm reduced to a memory that lingered only in the damp ground beneath her feet. She adjusted the bag at her side, securing her hold on her baby, and took a few steps toward the building before stopping again, something pulling her back, not physically, but in a way she could not ignore. She turned, her eyes finding him through the open door, and for a second, neither of them spoke, because there was nothing left that needed explaining, nothing that required words to make it real. Daniel remained in the driver's seat, one hand resting lightly on the wheel, his posture relaxed but present, as if he was not waiting for anything, only making sure she was where she needed to be. Emma gave a small nod, more to herself than to him, and turned back toward the entrance, climbing the steps one at a time, each movement steady, deliberate, carrying the quiet strength she had held on to all along. The door opened before she reached it, a warm light spilling out into the night, and as she stepped inside, she did not look back again, not because she forgot, but because she knew that some moments were not meant to be held onto, only carried forward in ways that did not need to be seen. Behind her, the car remained for a few seconds longer, the engine still running, until finally, without sound or hesitation, it pulled away from the curb and disappeared into the quiet street, leaving behind no trace except the one thing that would remain with her long after the night was over, the simple, undeniable truth that when everything had told him to keep driving, he had chosen to stop. The warmth inside the shelter did not feel immediate, it came slowly, settling into Emma Thompson's skin in layers, replacing the cold she had carried for hours, maybe longer, and as the door closed behind her, the outside world disappeared completely, leaving only the quiet hum of fluorescent lights and the soft movement of people who had learned how to exist without drawing attention. She stood there for a moment, just inside the entrance, her eyes adjusting, her body unsure whether it was allowed to relax yet, because safety had always been temporary, something that could vanish the moment she stopped expecting it to. A woman behind the front desk looked up, her expression calm, not surprised, not judgmental, just aware, and she gave a small nod that felt more welcoming than any words could have been. "You can come in," she said gently, her voice steady, practiced in a way that suggested she had seen nights like this before, and Emma stepped forward, her movements careful but no longer hesitant. The baby shifted in her arms, letting out a soft sound, and Emma instinctively adjusted the blanket again, this time the new one, thicker, warmer, wrapping it more securely around the small body, and for a brief second, she allowed herself to notice the difference, how the fabric held heat, how it did not cling damply like the old one had, how something so simple could change everything in a quiet, undeniable way. She was guided to a small seating area, worn but clean, where a few others sat in silence, each wrapped in their own thoughts, their own stories, and Emma lowered herself into a chair, her body finally acknowledging the exhaustion she had been holding back. Her shoulders dropped slightly, her breath slowed, and she leaned back just enough to feel supported, not by the chair, but by the moment itself. The woman from the desk returned with a cup of warm water and placed it gently on the table beside her. "There are extra blankets in the back if you need them," she added, not asking questions, not pressing for details, and Emma nodded quietly, her fingers tightening slightly around the cup as the warmth seeped into her hands, grounding her in a way she had not expected. Time passed differently inside the shelter, slower, softer, measured not by urgency but by small, steady moments, and Emma found herself watching her baby more than anything else, tracing each breath, each subtle movement, as if confirming again and again that everything was still okay. Her mind drifted back briefly, not to the storm itself, but to the moment the car had stopped, the sound of the engine, the calm voice that had cut through everything else, and she realized that it had not felt like chance, not entirely, but something closer to intention, something chosen. She did not know where he was now, or what he had returned to, and for a moment, the thought almost pulled her attention away from where she was, but she stopped it gently, bringing herself back to the present, to the quiet room, to the steady rhythm of her child's breathing. Outside, the storm had passed completely, leaving behind only damp streets and the faint reflection of streetlights on wet pavement, but inside, something else had shifted, something less visible but more lasting, and as Emma leaned her head back, closing her eyes for just a second longer than before, she understood something she had not been able to see earlier, that the night had not changed because the storm ended. It had changed because someone had decided that she was worth stopping for. And that choice, simple and quiet, had followed her all the way here. Sleep did not come all at once for Emma Thompson, it arrived in fragments, brief moments where her body gave in before her mind allowed it, and each time her eyes closed, even for a few seconds, she felt the weight she had been carrying shift slightly, not gone, but lighter in a way she had almost forgotten was possible. The chair beneath her was not comfortable, not designed for rest, yet it held her steady, and for now, that was enough. The baby slept more deeply now, wrapped securely in the new blanket, her small chest rising and falling in a rhythm that Emma found herself matching without thinking, as if syncing her own breath to something more certain, something that did not question whether tomorrow would come. Around her, the shelter remained quiet, not silent, but filled with the soft sounds of people existing carefully, a cough from across the room, the rustle of fabric, the distant creak of a door opening and closing, all blending into a steady background that felt almost protective. Emma shifted slightly, adjusting her position, careful not to disturb the fragile calm she had found, and as she did, the bag at her feet brushed against her leg, reminding her of everything that had changed in just a few hours. She leaned down slowly, opening it just enough to look inside, her fingers touching the folded onesie, the wipes, the formula, each item real, tangible, not something she had to stretch to afford or go without. And for a moment, she simply held on to that feeling, the quiet certainty that for tonight, at least, she had what she needed. Her thoughts drifted again, not sharply, not with urgency, but in a slow, reflective way that came only when survival was no longer immediate. She saw the road, the rain, the broken shelter, the endless stretch of uncertainty that had felt like it might swallow her whole, and then the car, the steady presence that had interrupted that pattern without asking for anything in return. She did not know why he had stopped, not really, and part of her understood that she might never know, but the absence of an explanation did not make it less real, it made it clearer, simpler, something that did not need to be justified to matter. Across the room, the woman at the desk glanced up briefly, her eyes moving across the space in a quiet check, making sure everyone was accounted for, and when her gaze passed over Emma, there was a small, almost imperceptible nod, not of acknowledgement, but of understanding, as if she recognized the kind of night Emma had just come through without needing to hear the details. Emma leaned her head back again, her eyes half closing, and for the first time in what felt like a long time, she allowed herself to think about the next day, not as something to fear, but as something that might be different, even in a small way. She did not imagine anything dramatic, no sudden changes, no easy solutions, just the possibility that not every moment would feel as heavy as the last. Her hand moved gently over the blanket, smoothing it once more, though it was already in place, and she whispered softly, more to herself than to the sleeping child, "We made it," the words quiet, almost fragile, but steady enough to hold. Outside, the city continued without pause, cars moving through damp streets, lights reflecting off pavement that still held the memory of the storm, but inside the shelter, time slowed just enough for something else to take root, something that did not depend on circumstance or control, but on a single, quiet decision made by someone who had no reason to stop, and as Emma drifted into a deeper, more complete rest, she carried that with her, not as a question, not as something to figure out, but as a truth that would remain long after the night had passed. Morning arrived quietly, not with noise or urgency, but with a soft shift in light that filtered through the shelter's narrow windows, turning the dim interior into something gentler, something that felt almost unfamiliar to Emma Thompson as her eyes opened slowly, her body still wrapped in the lingering calm of a rest she had not expected to find. For a moment, she did not move, her thoughts catching up to where she was, her surroundings settling back into place piece by piece until memory returned, not as a shock, but as a quiet continuation of the night before. The baby stirred against her, a small, content movement followed by a soft breath, and Emma immediately looked down, her hand instinctively adjusting the blanket, checking warmth, checking comfort, and when she saw the peaceful expression on that tiny face, something inside her eased again, the same way it had in the car, in the store, in every moment where things had not fallen apart. Around her, the shelter had begun to wake in slow, careful ways, people shifting in their seats, quiet voices exchanging brief words, the sound of footsteps moving across the floor, and none of it felt overwhelming, just present, just real, like a world that continued without demanding too much all at once. Emma sat up a little straighter, her body reminding her of the long night she had carried, the tension still lingering in her shoulders, the fatigue settled deep in her muscles, but there was something different now, something that made it easier to move through it rather than against it. She reached down for the bag again, opening it more fully this time, her fingers brushing over each item with a kind of quiet appreciation, the blanket, the formula, the small things that had become something larger simply because they had arrived when she needed them most, and as she lifted the new onesie slightly, she paused, not because of the item itself, but because of what it represented. A moment where she had not been forced to choose between what was necessary and what was possible. The woman at the front desk approached again, her steps unhurried, her presence steady. "There is coffee in the back and some breakfast if you would like," she said gently, and Emma looked up, meeting her gaze for a second before nodding, her voice still quiet but clearer than it had been the night before. "Thank you." She stood carefully, adjusting her hold on the baby, and followed the direction indicated, each step feeling more certain than the last, not because everything had changed, but because something inside her had shifted just enough to make movement possible again. As she reached the small kitchen area, the smell of fresh coffee filled the space, simple and ordinary, and yet it felt grounding in a way she had not expected, and as she poured a cup, her hands no longer trembled the way they had in the storm, the movement steady, controlled, real. She sat down at a nearby table, holding the cup between her hands, letting the warmth settle into her palms, and for a moment, she allowed herself to just sit, to exist without calculating what came next, without bracing for what might go wrong. Outside, the streets had dried in patches, the sky clearing into a pale gray that hinted at something brighter beyond it, and though Emma did not look out the window, she felt the change all the same, not in the weather, but in the quiet understanding that the night had not taken everything from her, that something had been given instead. She glanced down at her baby again, her expression softening in a way that no longer needed to hide, and as she took a slow sip of coffee, she realized that while nothing about her situation had been solved, something essential had been restored, the simple, steady belief that even in the hardest moments, there could still be a pause, still be a choice, still be someone who decided to stop, and that thought stayed with her, not as a question, but as a quiet foundation for whatever came next. The morning continued to unfold in quiet layers, each passing minute adding a little more clarity to Emma Thompson's thoughts, not in sudden realizations, but in small, steady understandings that settled into place without forcing themselves forward. She sat at the table longer than she intended, the warmth of the coffee lingering in her hands even after the cup was nearly empty, her gaze occasionally drifting toward the entrance as if part of her expected something to happen, though she could not say what. The baby began to stir more fully now, soft movements turning into gentle sounds that signaled the beginning of a new day, and Emma responded immediately, lifting her slightly, adjusting the blanket, her motions natural, practiced, shaped by months of doing everything on her own without pause. She reached into the bag and carefully took out the new onesie, unfolding it with quiet attention, and for a moment, she paused again, not because the action was difficult, but because it felt different, this simple act no longer tied to sacrifice or limitation, just care, just intention. She changed the baby gently, her hands steady, her expression soft, and when she finished, she held her close for a second longer than necessary, pressing her cheek lightly against the child's head as if grounding herself in something that would not shift. Across the room, the day had begun in earnest now, people moving with quiet purpose, some preparing to leave, others lingering, each carrying their own version of the night that had brought them here, and Emma watched them without judgment, without comparison, simply aware that she was part of something larger than her own story, even if only for this moment. The woman from the desk approached again, holding a small clipboard, her presence as steady as before. "We have a few resources if you are looking for longer-term options," she said, her tone gentle but clear, offering without pressing, and Emma listened, nodding slightly, her attention focused in a way that had not been possible the night before. Information followed, simple directions, contact numbers, places that might help, not promises, but possibilities, and Emma took it in carefully, not overwhelmed, not dismissive, just present, just willing to consider what might come next. As the woman stepped away, Emma looked down at the paper in her hands, reading the lines slowly, her mind moving through each option, weighing them not with fear, but with a kind of cautious openness that felt new, unfamiliar, but not unwelcome. She gathered her things a few minutes later, placing the remaining items back into the bag, adjusting her hold on the baby once more, and as she stood, there was a subtle shift in the way she carried herself, not dramatic, not obvious, but there, a quiet steadiness replacing the fragile uncertainty she had carried into the night. She moved toward the exit, each step measured but no longer hesitant, and as she reached the door, she paused briefly, her hand resting on the handle, her eyes lifting just enough to take in the space one last time, not as a place she had needed, but as a place that had held her when she did. Outside, the air was cool but calm, the sky brighter now, the storm completely gone, leaving behind only the memory of what had passed through, and as Emma stepped out onto the sidewalk, she did not look back, not because she was forgetting, but because she was moving forward, carrying with her something that could not be seen, something that had begun with a single, quiet decision made by someone else, and had become something she could now choose for herself, step by step, moment by moment. Without needing to know exactly where it would lead. The sidewalk stretched ahead of Emma Thompson in quiet simplicity, no longer blurred by rain or shadowed by uncertainty, just a path like any other, and for the first time in a long while, she did not feel like she was walking against something, but moving with it, even if she did not yet know where it would lead. The morning air was crisp, carrying a faint chill that no longer felt threatening, just present, and she adjusted the blanket around her baby once more, not out of fear, but out of care. Her movements slower now, more deliberate, as if she finally had the space to do things gently instead of quickly. Cars passed by at a distance, their motion steady, predictable, and the world around her continued in quiet normalcy, people heading to work, doors opening, voices carrying softly across the street, all the small signs of a day beginning, and Emma found herself noticing them in a way she had not the night before, as if she had stepped back into something she had almost forgotten how to be part of. She reached into her pocket briefly, feeling the folded paper the shelter had given her, the list of places, numbers, possibilities, and though she had not decided which direction to take yet, she no longer felt paralyzed by the choice, because for the first time, the decision did not feel like survival alone, it felt like something that could shape what came next. The baby made a soft sound, a small, waking murmur, and Emma smiled faintly, the expression subtle but real, her eyes lowering as she spoke in a quiet voice meant only for the child, "We are going to figure it out," and the words did not carry fear or doubt, only a steady intention that had not been there before. She continued walking, her steps even, her posture no longer curved inward, and as she reached the corner of the street, she paused, not because she was unsure, but because she was choosing, something as simple as deciding which way to turn holding a weight it had not carried before. She looked left, then right, her gaze thoughtful but calm, and after a brief moment, she stepped forward, committing to a direction without hesitation. Somewhere across the city, life continued in ways she could not see, offices opening, meetings starting, conversations unfolding, and though she had no connection to those places, no reason to think about them, a quiet awareness remained, not of who had helped her, but of the fact that help had existed at all, that in a moment where she had expected nothing, something had arrived anyway. She did not hold on to that thought tightly, did not turn it into something larger than it was, but she carried it with her in a way that did not need attention, like a steady presence just beneath the surface, something that would remain even as everything else changed. The city opened around her as she walked, buildings rising, streets widening, the rhythm of movement becoming more defined, and Emma adjusted her hold on her baby again, the motion smooth, natural, no longer driven by urgency, just by care. She passed a small storefront with its lights just turning on, the reflection catching briefly in the glass as she moved by, and for a second, she saw herself, not clearly, not in detail, but enough to recognize the difference, not in what she wore or where she was, but in how she carried herself, in the quiet steadiness that had replaced something fragile. She did not stop to look longer, did not linger, because she did not need to confirm it, she could feel it, and that was enough. As she continued forward, the distance behind her grew without effort, the night becoming something that no longer held her in place, and though the future remained uncertain, it no longer felt empty, it felt open, shaped not only by what had happened, but by what she could now choose to do with it, one step at a time, without needing to rush, without needing to fear that she would not make it through. The city carried on around Emma Thompson, steady and indifferent in the way cities always are, yet for her, something had shifted in a way that made each step feel intentional rather than forced, as if she was no longer being pushed forward by circumstance but choosing to move with it. The weight in her arms remained, the responsibility, the uncertainty, the long road ahead, none of it had disappeared, and yet it no longer felt like something she had to fight alone. The baby stirred again, this time waking fully, her small eyes opening slowly to the light of a new morning, and Emma paused just long enough to look down at her, really look, her expression softening into something quiet but certain, a kind of reassurance that did not come from promises, but from presence. She adjusted the blanket gently, her fingers moving with care, then continued walking, her pace steady, her direction chosen without hesitation. The street ahead opened into a busier avenue, the sound of traffic growing, the rhythm of the city becoming more defined, and Emma stepped into it without pulling back, her posture upright, her gaze forward, not searching for rescue, not expecting interruption, just moving as someone who understood that she could continue. In the distance, a bus approached, slowing as it neared the stop ahead, and Emma adjusted her path slightly, aligning with it, her movements natural, unhurried, and when the doors opened, she stepped forward without second-guessing, climbing the steps with the same quiet determination that had carried her through the night. Inside, the bus was half full, people scattered in their own spaces, their own thoughts, and Emma found a seat near the window, settling in carefully, positioning her baby securely before allowing herself to sit back for a moment, her eyes drifting to the passing streets as the vehicle pulled away. Buildings moved by in steady motion, reflections shifting across the glass, and for a brief second, she saw herself again, faint, layered over the city outside, not as she had been the night before, but as she was now, present, grounded, moving forward without needing to look back. She did not know what the day would bring, what the next step would look like, or how long it would take to reach something stable, but for the first time, those unknowns did not feel like barriers, they felt like space, something she could move through rather than something closing in around her. Her hand rested lightly on the blanket, her thumb brushing absent-mindedly against the soft fabric, and she thought briefly, not of the storm, not of the cold, but of a single moment, a car stopping in the rain, a door opening without question, a voice that did not ask for anything in return, and she realized that what stayed with her was not the event itself, but the choice behind it, the quiet decision to notice, to act, to care without needing a reason. The bus continued forward, merging into the flow of traffic, and Emma sat there, steady, calm, her breathing even, her presence grounded in the moment as it unfolded around her, and as the city carried her toward whatever came next, she understood something that would not leave her, not today, not later, not even when life became difficult again, that sometimes, the world does not change all at once, it changes in a single moment when someone chooses to stop, and in that moment, without asking, without knowing, they remind you that you can keep going.